Hello everyone and welcome to our next episode of our People, Planet, Partners, Prosperity podcast. I'm really pleased to be joined in our busy London office by Dr. Rosina Watson again. Thank you for joining us again, Rosina. Rosina is Associate Professor of Sustainability and Head of the Sustainable Business Group at Cranfield School of Management. So welcome back to our office, Rosina, and thanks for joining us for another episode.
Lovely to be back.
Could you just start off by just giving us an outline of your career and the work that you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, of course. So hello, everyone. As you said, I'm Dr. Rosina Watson. I spent about 15 years working in industry, primarily in retail with Argos and Homebase. Before moving into academia, where I'm now heading up our Sustainable Business Group at Cranfield School of Management, which is our business school. In my industry career, I was the first head of corporate responsibility for Argos and Homebase, which was a big change in my career from doing more commercial roles. But that's what really initiated my kind of deep interest and passion in the power of business to help deliver a more sustainable society. And I wanted to take that into a career that was more about researching that topic and then teaching others about that on general management courses and on specialist sustainability courses.
Amazing, thank you. It's great to have your expertise in the room. So when we last sat down, we really talked about focusing on the evolution of sustainability in the workplace and the changes that's brought about. Today, we're really going to delve into the measurement, management and integration of ESG into the workplace as well, to really kind of dive into the figures that sit behind kind of some of those strategies. So let's start off, what is actually the purpose of ESG reporting? What is it there to do?
So I love this aspect of sustainability, being a trained accountant myself. And I think it's good to start with, why do we measure anything? And we measure it to communicate to stakeholders that have an interest in our company. And we also measure it to help us improve our performance and target areas of performance that we want to improve. And there's not a massive difference when it comes to reporting on our sustainability performance, although some of the measures are less established and it's harder to get the data. But when it comes to sustainability impacts, I think there's two ways of looking at your reporting. The first one is you want to be able to tell your stakeholders that are interested in your company what are the most important sustainability risks and opportunities that are going to affect your company's ability to create value now and into the future. So investors are going to be really bothered about that, but employees are going to be really bothered about that as well. So you're telling them about what are the risks that things like climate change and biodiversity loss present to my ability to create value as a business. But then the other angle on it is people also want to know what negative impacts you're having on the environment and also how hopefully you're reducing those impacts or even contributing positively. And that might be a different set of stakeholders. So that might be your neighbours. If you're a factory and you're emitting pollution, they want to know how much pollution you're putting out. Or if you're taking water out of a catchment area, how much water you're taking out. And those two dimensions are what's the heart of what's known in the trade as double materiality. So one aspect of materiality is, how can these sustainability trends impact my business? The other aspect is, how is my business impacting the world? So those are the two lenses. But essentially, you want to report so people can see if you're doing better against the things that you think are important. That's the secret to it. And we often get really hung up on external reporting, which in the finance world is kind of your annual reports and accounts. But there's also internal reporting, which is more like management accounts. So the other aspect of sustainability reporting is what you report internally. And the purpose of that is to allow you to make decisions, taking those things into account, but also driving behaviour. So you want people to change what they're doing to try and reach those targets. And then those targets, which should be trickling down into personal objectives, director bonuses, long-term incentive plans. So just as with other reporting of data, it's there to help you change behaviour and improve.
I think it really helps drive the responsibility and accountability internally as well. And I think
absolutely
we've aligned our carbon accounting with our financial accounting, so the P&L sheets down to site level, and that's really given each site ownership over their carbon data as well, and got the financial
community involved in reporting, not just financial numbers, but your carbon numbers, which I guess is another benefit.
Yes, definitely. And giving that insight that the two go hand in hand together, it allows us to kind of see which sites are performing well in terms of, profit and growth, as well as sustainability metrics alongside that as well.
That's great move that you've taken there.
Yeah. So there's a whole host of ESG metrics that we're either required to report on from a regulatory perspective or expectations from other stakeholders as well. And we ourselves include a wide range of those in our own sustainability report. But how do we actually do that? How do we actually start to embed those metrics?
So in terms of driving the programmes that improve the metrics. Exactly. Okay. So here I've got five top tips to share with you and the listeners today. This is from research, but also from personal experience, and also listening to other sustainability professionals talk about what they think makes worse. And the first top tip is very much linked to what you were talking about and what we were talking about earlier. And that's about making the business case for the initiatives that you want to drive forward. It can be really alien if you haven't come from a finance background, or you're coming more from a perspective of, surely we should be doing this, it's the right thing to do. But being able to communicate that in a language of finance that your finance director and other people in the organisation will understand is really valuable. And on our course, we've got a whole module about economics for sustainability, which helps people build cost-benefit analysis for sustainability projects. Some of them are going to be more straightforward. So if you're installing an array of solar panels, it's easier to sort of demonstrate financially the benefits that you might get. But something like improving diversity and inclusion, it's about trying to find the proxy measures that will show you that you're going in the right direction and will help you build your business case for investment in those type of programs. So that's the first one, is build the business case. The second one is to make your sustainability projects a solution to someone else's problem. This can be really impactful. Rather than saying, as well as all the other things you've got on your plate, you've got to do sustainability as well. That makes it a chore. But if you try and listen to other people, understand their problems, the issues they're dealing with, and make your initiative a solution to their problem, that can be really powerful. That often involves using a language that isn't necessarily the language that you'd use to talk about the problem or the opportunity. And it can be about exploring what they really care about and finding a way to connect, because you might really care about one aspect of sustainability and they might not care about that, but they might care about something else. They might care about the social side. So finding that point of connection.
Finding those levers, yeah.
And a really sort of straightforward example of that at Argos was that I initiated a project where we started taking back end-of-life mobile phones and laptops. Right. But at the same time as doing that, it meant that we set up facilities in one of our distribution centres to actually refurbish and repurpose goods that had been returned to us. And so that was presented to the business as a solution to a returns problem rather than a sustainability initiative. Right. But it still achieved that goal of not having so much useless electronics lying around either in people's homes or in our distribution centres as returns.
So it's changing the language for the audience that you're trying to convince or communicate
Sometimes
with.
It's like a Trojan horse.
Yeah.
So you're sneaking in sustainability.
Yes.
So it's like you're finding common means to different ends.
Yeah.
So that doesn't matter because you're still getting the project.
Well, it goes
done.
to show it doesn't have to be this or sustainability. It's both together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great. Right. The third top tip is widen the accountability. So we talked before about the need for lots of people across different functions of business to have ownership for the sustainability strategy. You can't just do it in your team as a sustainability professional. And there's a number of ways you can widen the accountability. One of them is governance. So what are the working groups or committees that you set up to drive your agenda forward? The other one is embedding sustainability in processes. Processes, big or small. So what are the core processes that are happening every day around the organisation where we could just add a dimension to that process which would bring sustainability into the decision making. So for example, at Argos, we had a product specifications sheet that had to be approved every time there was a new product introduced. We added a packaging weight figure on there. So they had to, and the target was their packaging weight had to reduce from one product selection to the next. So very simple, just adding a dimension. And then the other aspect is measurement, as we said at the beginning. So governance, processes, measurement, because what gets measured gets done generally.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
So that's ways to widen the accountability. The fourth tip is to invest in partnerships and collaboration. So we talked about that quite a bit last episode. It can be hard to initiate a partnership with a competitor or an organisation that's very different from you, like a charity.
Yeah.
So it's about finding those areas of shared value. What's the common aspect of a problem that you're facing together that you can do something about better together than you could do separately. But in that case, you have to be really clear about what each partner's bringing to the table as well.
And build the trust.
Through that relationship. And the more you understand each other, the more you understand how your partner's going to derive value from the partnership, the more you can create shared value out of it. And then the last one, maybe the most important one, is don't wait for permission to act. I think we all have this tendency as we go through our careers to think, well, someone else more senior than me will take this forward or run with this. But I think it's down to all of us to take the initiative to try and do things more sustainably where we have a sphere of influence, no matter what that sphere of influence is. And people do pick up on your behaviour, big or small, and model that and emulate it. And that can have a big impact, a big ripple effect around you. And sometimes when you want to change the system, you can't change the system in one fell swoop. Sometimes you have to start with the small nuts and bolts, and then the success of those small changes can give people confidence of the art of the possible, and that can grow from there. So wherever you are, at whatever role you have, don't underestimate your agency to do things differently and better. And a very simple thing, again, this time at Cranfield, is when we run the residentials for our sustainability courses, we only serve vegetarian food. So people have to opt in if they want a meat option. And first of all, our catering team thought that was really weird that we were asking for that. But 2 years later, it's become very common now for a lot of events on campus to be vegetarian only.
Yeah, all sustainability events I attend are normally vegan as well.
Or maybe we haven't gone far enough.
I haven't quite gone that far yet.
But the other aspect of that is don't wait for permission, and also empower others.
Yeah.
So, we often talk about the fact that you need leadership from the top. You need to feel that you're empowered by your senior leaders, but we also have a role wherever we are in the organisation to empower others, whether that's to bring their ideas to us and share other ideas, or just get on and do some stuff.
Yeah. I think that one's so crucial because a lot of us who work in this field have done so in isolation for a long, long time. So we've had to develop those partnerships internally and externally to actually help us get stuff done. Yeah.
So don't underestimate your power, and don't underestimate how much there is innate desire in a lot of people to do things differently. It's just about empowering and unlocking that.
So when we're actually looking at the measurement, the reporting, the management, how do we start to integrate those pillars of ESG into both the strategy and the reporting?
Well, I think one of the most important things is about looking at the whole sphere of sustainability. Carbon is obviously really important, and I think the development that we're all grappling with now is really getting a grip on our scope 3 emissions, which links back to what we were saying about partnerships.
Yeah,
because
attacking the whole value chain.
Exactly. You have to work more closely with the suppliers so you can understand their footprint. You can understand ways of working with them to reduce their footprint. So scope 3 emissions are the emissions that come from your supply chain. But it's not just about carbon. So if you're taking a sort of holistic approach to sustainability, I think that this sort of topic now that's really coming to the forefront, quite rightly, is biodiversity. So our planet is our home. It supplies us with everything that we need. We only have one planet. But for business, I think it's sometimes harder conceptually to think about the ways that we do utterly rely on biodiversity to be successful into the long term. So businesses can have a negative impact on biodiversity through overuse of resources, overconsumption, change of land use, for example. But equally, they depend on biodiversity. So there's obvious things like for raw materials, so wood, timber, textiles. Those are kind of the provisioning services that biodiversity offers. But biodiversity also has maintenance services. So biodiversity cleans the air, cleans the water, protects us from floods. So I think there's growing recognition that we need to use nature-based solutions to prevent things like flooding, for example. But there's also cultural services. So biodiversity has a value to us as human beings for our well-being, for religious purposes. In some industries, like for tourism, that's really critical. So trying to get an understanding. So just as I was talking about double materiality earlier, getting an understanding of the impact we have on biodiversity, but also how our businesses rely on biodiversity, I think is the next really key thing to grasp for most organisations.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see forthcoming legislation that's going to drive the transparency around reporting on reliance on nature and biodiversity as well.
And one really interesting example of a company that's right at the forefront of this is Faith in Nature, which is a cosmetics brand. It's been around for a long time. It came up about in the 60s. They've just introduced a nature representative onto their board. Yeah. And they've also shared the way that they've achieved that from a legal perspective.
Yes, they've open sourced the clauses for that as well. Yeah, incredible example.
It's so interesting to hear them talk about how that's changed the nature of the conversation in the boardroom, where you have another voice that you're trying to respond to.
Yeah, I think that example really made us think about how could we bring people and planet into our decision-making process as a business as well. Stopping short of putting nature on the board, but how can we make that part of the equation and part of the decision-making processes?
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's kind of my sort of key message. I think don't forget about the aspect of biodiversity. I'm sure that's coming on everyone's agenda. And then the other aspect is obviously the S element of ESG, the social aspect, and the ways that looking at your social impact and trying to improve that is also a value creating activity. I think businesses are thinking more about the social aspect of ESG in a more value creating way. So instead of thinking about how do we do the absolute minimum, so something like health and safety is about avoiding deaths, rather now we're thinking more about well-being and enhancing people's experiences and lives at work, and moving away from thinking about what's the minimum wage that we should be paying in our supply chains to what's the living wage, and how can we enhance the livelihoods of the people that we depend on in our supply chains, but particularly in a kind of agricultural...
Shared prosperity.
I love that term, shared prosperity, Because if your supply chain partners aren't thriving, they won't be able to supply you the products that you need to be supplied. So it's really not just about the social dimension in your organisational boundaries. It's beyond that, and I think it's only when you're looking across the agenda that you can really make sure that you're not missing any areas that are really critical from a risk or opportunity perspective.
And those social aspects, it's much harder to grapple with the how to measure those as well. With carbon or some environmental metrics, it's much more tangible to measure. Yeah. It is much harder to get to grips with how to measure some of those social aspects.
But we do have to try to find a proxy for that. We often talk about that in class, is kind of how do you measure things like people development? Do you measure internal promotions? Training hours is such a blunt instrument. How do you get a better feel? And some of those measures will have to be more qualitative than quantitative.
Yeah.
But then having said that can all be quite overwhelming, can't it?
Yes.
When you talk about carbon, biodiversity, social, supply chain, which is why I think it's really important that we use measurement and we think about the things that we really want to drive action on and prioritise those, because there's only limited money, there's only limited time. As organisations, we need to use this idea of materiality, what's really crucial, to prioritise the issues that we are going to really drive action on and maybe be leading on, versus the others where we're just going to make sure that we're kind of in line and we're meeting, we're complying with legislation. And I think as
professionals, that's so incredibly useful as well, to stop us feeling overwhelmed with the enormity of the problems that we need to solve as well. So, focusing on where we can actually make positive change as a business as well by using that materiality studies. So with this increased amount of measurement, reporting, and kind of the legislation driving this as well, how do businesses avoid accusations of greenwashing and indeed green hushing now as well?
Yeah, as you say, a benefit of a great approach to sustainability is being able to celebrate it and communicate that to stakeholders. But it's obviously a key issue at the moment that people are grappling with. And my view is there's two kind of forms of greenwashing. One is when you get so excited about your progress, you want to share it, you want to celebrate it, but you forget to to sort of put that in the context of the other areas of the agenda where you recognise that you're not doing as well as you could be, or you need to take further steps. But then there's the other sort, which is a bit more intentional, where you're celebrating one aspect of something that might be very small in the grand scheme of your impacts, and using that as a tactic to distract people from focusing on the real issues, which is obviously more of a fundamental problem.
Yeah.
So this, you can't sort of, if you're a fashion retailer, you can't remove sequins and celebrate that that's a really positive step if you're still sending hundreds of millions of items of clothing to landfill as a fast fashion retailer. So there's nothing wrong with taking small steps and celebrating those steps. I think it's about when those small steps in themselves become a marketing tactic and trying to pull the wool over the eyes of customers. So I think if you're trying to avoid greenwashing, there's kind of 4 key steps to doing that. I think the first one is having that really good understanding of what your material impacts are. If you need to know, in broad terms where your carbon footprint is and whether the bit you're tackling is relevant in the context of the bigger picture of your carbon footprint. So understanding that across your supply chain of a product is really key. It's also about seeking clarity on terms. So as a marketing professional, this is difficult to navigate as it is for everybody else. What's planet friendly versus eco-conscious. So really understanding those terms and using the guidance that's now out there to allow you to avoid making genuine mistakes in terms of the claims you're making.
And this is a new skill for the marketing community as well.
Absolutely. So there's a whole load of upskilling that has to take place there as well. So in the UK, there's the UK Green Claims Code. So that's not legislation. It's a voluntary set of guidelines, but it's a good set of guidelines.
Incredibly eye-opening as well.
And very clear. So they were written by the government and the Competition and Markets Authority. They're not legally binding, but they can be used in conjunction with consumer protection law to prosecute people. So you can fall foul of those rules. The ASA, the Advertising Standards Agency, also have a set of guidelines which are useful. And then the Financial Conduct Authority has some other guidelines for people in the financial sector. So that's useful if you're operating that sector in terms of what you call different funds and whether those terminology is valid. And then in the EU, they're a bit further ahead from us. So they're planning a green claims directive, which will be legally binding. And another directive that works with that around labelling, so customers can make good decisions. That's already been passed by the EU. So there's more binding stuff coming out of the EU around that. And then the last thing is really consider your toolkit when it comes to marketing. So is a sustainability claim really the best way to get people to buy that product? Because if it isn't, why take the risk of being accused of greenwashing if you could be communicating the benefit of that product in a different way, whether that's its convenience, the fact it's just a better product, it works better, it's cheaper, it's not such a big package, so buy that one for that reason. Unless you're a company that's got sustainability really in its DNA and you're very much trusted to do the right thing, sometimes another way of getting the customer to buy the product that is a more sustainable product could be more effective. And then finally, if you are going to test something, so if you are going to do like an eco store, your best possible environmental credentials in one place, be clear that you're not just testing it because it looks good. You're testing it because you want to know what parts of that sustainable store, for example, work so that you can roll them out across the rest of your portfolio if it's successful.
So it's really a lot around reputational damage, where this can become dangerous and, a major risk factor for business. And I think communicating with, responsibility, accountability and humility as well, particularly if things haven't gone quite to plan, actually being open and honest and humble about that and communicating that as part of your journey, I think really helps build that trust.
We learn so much about things that haven't gone quite right. So learning from failures with Reiki, not that that's something you'd put on your package, but there's other ways of communicating to stakeholders about you know, in your more extensive reporting about what you've done, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what your plans are to address that going forward.
And all this is so new still for everybody as well. So I think that's incredibly important to be open, honest and humble about any mistakes that you've made along the way as well.
But as you say, the danger is that people that you mentioned greenwashing, people get so worried about saying the wrong thing that they don't want to put their head above the parapet at all. And then the flow of information to consumers and other stakeholders dries up.
Yeah. It's a fine balancing act.
It is a fine balancing act.
Yeah.
Not easy.
When we last met up, we talked a little bit about the legislative drivers that are driving the change in sustainability and ESG. How is some of the legislation driving the accountability and credibility within the measurement and reporting?
Well, obviously, it's a good thing to have a set of criteria by which we can all report, because I think we said at the beginning the purpose of reporting is so people can compare.
Yeah.
And if everyone's not reporting on the same basis and that data's not audited, it's hard to trust it and to compare it. And that's it has been a slight Wild West in the past when it's come to sustainability reporting. So I think it's a good thing that this legislation's creating a level playing field. So the first thing that's really been getting traction over the last couple of years is the task force on climate-related disclosures. So this is a requirement for a set of disclosures on that first angle of materiality. So this is more about investors wanting to know how climate change is a risk to your business, whether that's because of physical impacts like floods, or whether that's because of transition impacts. So carbon pricing, which is going to make your emissions more expensive.
Market risk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that they're looking to say, you know, at what risk does this company have in its balance sheet to climate impacts? That's now mandatory, as people probably know, in the UK for big companies, and it will be for smaller companies going forward. The other really key bit that's going on in the EU at the moment is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, known as CSRD. I'm trying to spell out all the acronyms rather than just using the letters. So this came into force in January last year, and this is basically aligning sustainability reporting approaches for companies in Europe or companies in the UK that have got a large piece of business in Europe, which I think Paragon is one of. So there's a set of standards that companies will have to report to in Europe around that. And the government in the UK has said that they want to do something similar. They're behind where the EU is on it. But there's going to be something called the UK Sustainability Disclosure Standard, which will similarly set like rules and guidelines about how to report on these different impacts.
Another acronym.
They're hoping to align it with ISSB, which is something that's been established for a long time about reporting on sustainability in the UK. So the idea is to try and align it to what everyone else is doing before, but we all know there's always extra bells and whistles that you have to take into account. But across all these things, I think it's a decision that you can make as a firm, whether to treat this as a sort of tick box exercise. Okay, we'd have to gather this data because we have to report on it. Let's do it from a compliance perspective. Or you can really use the insight that data collection drives and the conversations you have around the difficulty of accessing the data and how you're going to address that going forward to actually reshape your business and to inform what we were saying at the beginning, how you need to put sustainability into your strategy and to differentiate yourself to be a leader in that space. So it can either be a chore or you can use it as key management information, as we were talking about earlier.
I think we've found these types of legislation, you know, around disclosure really helpful for starting to integrate ESG reporting with financial reporting, because you have to involve those other departments and teams from across the business to actually get to the data that you need. It's been absolutely crucial in spreading that work across the business as well, and really
widening
integrating
the accountability.
And really widening that accountability within the business.
And the legislation sets a level playing field. Because you, as a business, you don't want to be rushing. You don't necessarily want to rushing ahead. Maybe you do want to rush ahead on some of those things you can strategically differentiate on. But it means everybody's moving together to raise the bar around these issues, and it's also improving transparency. As I said, it was hard for people before to really trust non-audited, non-standardized data. But it is also difficult, though, because, you know, every business has different sustainability impacts. So water might be really important for one business, or plastics, whereas for another business it might be much more about the social side. But if you're a business that doesn't really make much and you're a people business, but I think there had to be some kind of, common denominator about the approaches to reporting across the board.
And that's a whole new experience, having your work scrutinised by auditors as well, I found, for the first time. Yeah.
Hopefully the questions they ask are kind of useful. Yeah.
It's the terminology, I think, getting scripts for the terminology. Yeah.
So you're saying the same things, but calling it different things.
Yes, absolutely. Do you think the legislation is going far enough at the moment to drive the change that's needed?
I think businesses are struggling to keep up with what's happening on the reporting side. I think legislation on reporting is probably going as far as it needs to be, but there's probably other forms of legislation that would be helpful. I think many of us are crying out for there to be a carbon price or a plastic tax. I think there are other ways, there are other levers that legislation could be pulling. But then at the same time, I've got experience of trying to work with government. We were part of the consultation around the Green Deal when I was working at Homebase.
Okay.
They never really can fully understand the implications of how legislation actually impacts businesses and how it's implemented. And sometimes if they get too involved in detailed legislation, it can have unintended consequences. So I think the more that businesses can actually get together to self-regulate and drive standards from a position of understanding of the art of the possible, that can be helpful as well. Yeah,
I think businesses are starting to take responsibility regardless of the legislation now as well.
Yeah, and the legislation is I think that the role of the legislation is more is to make sure that the laggards, keeping the laggards moving forward rather than actually leading.
Yes, and to develop that level playing field across, the accountability and the reporting standards as well. Yeah.
But then the last thing I just wanted to add on this reporting front was I'm sure most of you have heard of TCFD, which is the climate reporting one. There's also something called what is it called? I've lost my notes.
The TNFD.
TNFD, Task Force on Nature-Related Disclosures, which is doing something similar around biodiversity reporting. Which we kind of would expect to see come into play for bigger companies maybe as early as 2025.
Yeah, I think having some frameworks for that would be crucial because, again, carbon reporting is quite well established now, but how
relatively,
to even... Yes, nowhere near in terms of the financial reporting.
That's like
but
thousands of years.
Still relatively new, but relatively well established. But, getting started on even assessing your nature and biodiversity related risks is kind of a much trickier starting point. So
definitely,
we're really welcoming the legislation around that and the reporting.
And the good thing with TFND is that they've got really good guidance on how to start approaching thinking about it. So I think that's the good thing, is that there's that time to really start getting your head around how to start thinking about it before the legislation actually hits you.
Yes, definitely. And we tend to get hit in the second round of legislation for these things, but we feel the impact from our clients who will get impacted kind of when it's first released as well. We start to see the questions flow down into our supply chain as well. So, we like to try and stay ahead of that legislative journey as well. So how have you seen this increase in sustainability reporting actually integrate into businesses and help drive the strategy?
Well, often where it's showing up in a more integrated way is annual reporting, for example. So integrated annual reports, which don't just have financial information, they have non-financial information in. So that helps the conversation with the investors to be more holistic if it's reported in that more holistic way. But there's lots of other ways in which better data and better measurement can help. So another really important area is investment appraisal. If you're looking to propose a project and you've got a carbon, the sort of extent to which it will help reduce your carbon emissions, and you put a cost against that. So you maybe in your organisation you have a shadow carbon cost against that. So if a project saves carbon, that saving gets built into the business case. That's another way that good data can help make better decisions. I've seen it help integrate sustainability risks and opportunities better into your risk management approach. So often you have a risk register for your company, and the sustainability risks are kind of a separate risk register rather than being fully integrated. So you really want to see how your sustainability related risks can, they should be on the same list as your overall risk register, not a separate list. And the data around the scale of those risks helps that process become more integrated. There's things like supplier selection. Mm-hmm. So increasingly organisations have supplier scorecards. You can have a sustainability element to that supplier scorecard. Yeah. So you're then using data around sustainability performance in your supply chain to drive your decisions about who to buy from. Mm-hmm. Things like product selection as well. So if you're deciding a product, you can choose between two based on knowing the relative impacts of those two products on different sustainability criteria. So product development is the other one. So if you're I really liked it in Nike. Hannah Johnson was one of the first people that was head of sustainability and innovation. And so if you're deciding to make a new material, a new product, and you can look at what's the impact of using plastic versus leather, for example, you can use that data to inform your selection and the product specification of new products even. So there's kind of not many places where better data on ESG doesn't help to integrate it into processes, because most of our corporate processes are based on, financial data, cost benefits, cash flow, return on investment. If we can factor in sustainability impacts into those numbers, that helps integrate it throughout.
So the sustainability performance is equal to the cost performance, really. And those are really, really great examples of how it's not a sustainability or a business strategy. It's just a business strategy.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. That's been such an amazing discussion about how the metrics, how the data, how the measurement can really start to help embed sustainability across the whole business, across all departments, across the innovation, across the products and everything. And it just really highlights to me what I've always known, that, sustainability should be part of every part of the business. And I think the power of data is incredible in allowing us to do that as well. So it's been a fascinating discussion today, and I'd like to really thank you for joining us in our busy London office again, Rosina. I look forward to meeting you again soon.
Thanks, Lucy. It's been lovely to be here and really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you for joining the latest episode of People, Planet, Partners, Prosperity. Thank you. Bye-bye.